So learning induced happiness and joy more than material goods. And if you think about it, that makes sense because to material goods, whether it's money or whatever money can buy, we habituate to it, right? But we can't habituate to learning because learning by definition is change, and you can't habituate to change. So if you take progression, if you take learning away from people, even if they're at the top of their game, then I think depression is going to kick in, negative mood is going to kick in. And that also relates to this other thing that we talk about, which is there is this well-known happiness curve, which is happiness really dips in your midlife.
Hello, everyone. I'm Larry Weeks. Welcome to the Bounce Podcast. You know, these days on social media, at least most of my feeds, I see everybody's optimizing things. And this has been like this for years. Maybe it's more pronounced for me because of the algo and what have you, but people are tracking everything and trying to optimize their steps, their macros, their mood, measuring, tweaking, improving. And I get it. I do the same thing. I've been doing this for years. I've spent, I don't know how many years exploring tools and ideas on how to live better, be better, so on and so forth. That's what this podcast, for the most part, is all about. But here's the thing. Improving in an area, winning in an area alone doesn't guarantee happiness or fulfillment. If we lose awareness of what we're doing, what we've done, what we've built or have, if we lose the ability to appreciate, feel joy, and derive meaning from all of it, it's atrophy of emotional response. We adapt, we normalize, we stop seeing the beauty, the progress, the relationships, the very things that we work so hard to get. And according to my guest on this podcast, that's not a flaw in our character, it's a feature of our brains. We're wired to tune out what doesn't change. It helps us survive or helped us survive. But it can also rob us of joy, gratitude, and even the drive to change what no longer serves us. My guest today is Tali Sharot. Tali is the director of the Affective Brain Lab. She is professor of cognitive neuroscience in the Department of Experimental Psychology and the Max Planck UCL Center for Computational Psychiatry at University College London, and on the faculty of the Department of Brain and Cognitive Science at MIT. Tali holds a BA in economics and psychology from Tel Aviv University and a PhD from New York University. Her research integrates neuroscience, behavioral economics, and psychology to study how emotion and motivation influence people's beliefs and decisions. She is also the author of several books, including The Influential Mind, and her latest, Look Again, The Power of Noticing What Was Always There, is the touchstone of our conversation. Tali's work has been featured in the New York Times, the Washington Post, the BBC, and her 2 TED Talks have been viewed more than 15 million times. So in this episode, we discuss her work at the Affective Brain Lab, her neuroscience research following 9/11, exploring how trauma shapes memory, and then we get into the science of habituation, the core focus of our conversation, why we stop noticing even the best parts of our lives, the hidden emotional upside of habituation, the psychological cost of getting everything you want, how to reawaken appreciation for what's already around us, how learning and surprise drive happiness more than rewards. We talk about relationships and how absence and novelty can rekindle connection, why gratitude can feel flat and how to reconnect with it, how to use imagination to dishabituate, some stoic techniques and perspective shifts. Tali brings a lot of scientific insight with wonderfully practical lens, offering ways we can experience more happy moments and joy, not by adding more to our life, but by noticing what's already there. So let's get into it.
I have so many questions for you, Tali, that I went down this rabbit hole of your lab and your other books, which they weren't on my radar. So I'm going to ramble to begin and ask you, going to probably move you all around. Before we kind of dive in the book, if you could give my audience a quick overview of what you're working on these days and what your focus has been lately.
Yeah, sure. So, my lab has quite a few members, and so they have different interests, but I can just list a few of the things that we're working on. So one thing that we've started working on is, I guess, the joy of thinking. What makes thinking fun? What makes thinking pleasurable or cognition pleasurable?
Joy of thinking.
The
Cool.
joy of thinking. Yeah. What makes it pleasurable? And like in general, what makes cognition pleasurable? I mean, even what we're doing now, hopefully, will be pleasurable to both sides. And all we're going to do is communicate information to each other. And so why is that like fun? And how does the brain process these types of what we call cognitive rewards? And I think what we kind of are seeing that to some extent, the brain uses the same system that it uses to process other types of reward, like food, money, and sex. But it also uses a more evolutionary new system, as you'd expect. And it's really kind of an interaction between these systems. So we're interested in that. How does it work? And what are the individual differences, right? I think for some people, it could be more pleasurable than others. How does it develop through age? When do you see it? We have collaborations with people studying monkeys as well. We want to look at the evolutionary roots of it. So that's one project we just got the grant for. And then other things that we're doing is I have students are interested in human AI interaction. So we're looking at how humans bias AI, but also AI bias humans back, and other things that are interesting in the kind of feedback loop between humans and AIs. Other things that we're looking at is, for a while now, we've been interested in how people seek information. What are the kind of principles that are guiding how you go online and seek information? And can we help people do that better with easy tools online? So we have a new tool that we call Digital Diet, that it's basically a plugin in an app. So if you download the plugin, anytime you search something on Google, it will give you the Google results, but next to each result, it will give you 3 scores, automated. One is the emotional impact of the content, how positive or negative is it? One is how likely it is to enhance your knowledge on average. And the other is how likely it is to help you make decisions on average. And these scores are based on the machine algorithms that we've developed, which are, of course, fed on human ratings, thousands of humans ratings. So that's a few of the things that we're working on.
Wow, Google needs to buy that.
Oh, we had a conversation with Google.
Did
I don't think they were with at least, one representative. They didn't seem super interested in having other scores beyond what they're using.
Wow. When was this? I'm just curious.
It was quite a few years ago now.
All right.
And it was a certain division. It was a very specific division. I won't go into details, but it's not necessarily the main. Yeah. So I mean, we're happy. We'll be more than happy to talk.
So this is the Affective Lab.
Affective Brain Lab, yeah.
Affective Brain Lab, sorry. Yeah. Yeah, because I didn't have time. There's so much information, and I kept seeing the research papers at the site much earlier as I was prepping to talk with you. But one of the things you mentioned at AI, there was some research about an AI feedback, looks like an AI feedback loop. Maybe it's the one about bias. I started to read it. But I wasn't able to finish it. But was the conclusion that it tends to solidify what our prior biases were before we interacted with it, or we're giving it who we are and it's kind of spitting that back out to us in some way, in some context?
Yeah.
Or am I completely off?
No, you're very accurate. So, what has been already known for quite a while is that what AI tends to do, it tends to take human bias and enhance it in its own content that it provides.
Does that mean amplify? Does that mean
amplify it? Exactly. Okay. It amplifies it. So it takes the bias and it amplifies it. And that we already knew. But what we were interested in was, well, okay, so you have the human bias and then you have the AI amplifying that bias, but that's not the end of it, because now the human is going to interact with the AI. So our idea was, well, this likely means that the AI that's now amplified human bias is going to interact with a human, and that will cause the human to have a higher bias than it had before, right? And now,
of the same bias?
The same bias, just more of it. I'm sure, it's possible that there's new biases. I mean, that's an interesting question, and I think that's highly likely. But we just looked at existing biases, very different, not just social biases. For sure, we looked at gender-related and race-related biases, but also just biases in perception, biases in emotional perception, which are known because humans have a whole lot of biases. Not all of them are bad. That's well known. So we started with some biases that we know humans have. We then fed the human data into the AI as expected. The AI amplified this bias, right? Because it uses it as a signal that it could and then we had the humans interact with the AI. And what we found that then when the humans went and made decisions on their own independently from the AI, their bias was now greater. And so you'd imagine what happens in the real world, that now these humans with even greater bias than they had before are now going to feed the data back into the AI, which would make that bias
Yeah.
even larger, and
Yeah.
so on and so forth. So
Well,
that's what that paper is about.
That's interesting. Just real quick, and thank you for indulging me here, but from a standpoint of objectivity. So one of my hopes was, by the way, I've got stuff I've built. I use AI.
I love AI, actually.
Yeah, I love it. But I am getting some, in fact, I'm noticing it more and more here of late, but some responses back that seem to be trying to please me in a way where, oh yeah, Larry, you're onto something. And now I'm trusting that less because of the predictive language it's using. But I'm wondering now, because it does know me, I've given a lot of information. Is it just kind of reinforcing what I want? Is the Star Trek Spock version where he's emotionless, objective, anything surface from that, or is it dependent on how the user is interacting with it?
So we've noticed the same thing. And actually we started a study on this. So I have a PhD student, Amber Dutterman, and she's looking exactly at this. It's relatively the beginning, but what we have noticed so far is that we did an experiment where we gave the AI people's preferences. So they either liked something or didn't like something, or didn't really say if they liked it or not. And what we found is two things. One is that you're right that to some extent, the AI is reflecting back your preference to you, which means it's more likely to be positive if you like something than versus you didn't like it. However, we do see a huge, what we call positivity bias, where regardless of whether someone says, I like it or I don't like it, the AI responds with a lot of positive words. And it tends to say, well, these are all the positive aspects of this thing that we're talking about. And sometimes it has negative aspects, but much less. And the effect is huge. It's really tremendous. And so now we started looking, okay, so what does that mean about the human that's just receiving that, continuously kind of positive feedback? And I don't have anything great to tell you so far. So it's not.
No, that's just interesting.
We just showed so far that an AI does that more than other humans. Turns out humans also tend to do this. Not surprising, because AI is supposed to reflect, but the AI is doing it more. So significantly, statistically, we could show that it's more likely to give a positive response with more positive words than a human does. And so then that started causing us to think all other things, which we haven't tested yet, which is, well, so far we've only tested it on preferences. So, nothing fundamental, but we have started thinking about, would the AI be more likely to give you positive feedback, even if you make a mistake, an error, or at least say it in a way that sounds too positive? And if that is true, would that make it more difficult for humans to correct their own mistakes and errors?
Right.
So that is like the next step.
Look, I want AI or even humans to give me bad news in a nice way, and in depending on the domain or context, more positivity may be better, but in certain contexts, financial, whatever, risk.
So just say it. Risk is another. You happen to like all the domains. So I have another student. She's looking at the risk, about like asking the AI about risk related, financial questions. So she's looking at that in the moment.
Fascinating. I want to go back to how you got into the field here. You were in New York City during 9/11, right? And I'm reading that this experience shaped your research interests and led you down the road of how emotions affect memories. Is that right?
So I was already doing my PhD before 9/11 at NYU, so downtown New York. And I was already doing my studies on how emotion shapes memories, and specifically traumatic negative experiences. And that's when, 9/11 happened. And that was, a case study, I would guess, an obvious one of how negative emotions and negative experience will alter memory. So then we did the study in which we asked people to recollect memories from 9/11. So we did that a little bit after, perhaps less than a year, a few months. I don't remember exactly when. After we had people recollect events based on specific cues that we gave them. And also for comparison, we asked them to recollect events from a few months before that. So I think it was the summer before. So August versus September. And we also recorded their brain activity while they did that. And what we found was that the memories from 9/11 were more vivid and more detailed. So people would use more words and to describe them. And that is more the case as people were closer to the towers. So literally by miles. If you were there versus where you were in Midtown versus you were uptown, that made a difference. So the closer you were to the events, the more vivid, the more detailed, the more likely it was to elicit emotion. And within the brain, what we saw is this interaction between two regions. One is the amygdala, which is important for emotional arousal. You have one in each part of hemisphere of your brain. It's about the size of a cherry tomato. The amygdala sits next to hippocampus. The hippocampus is important for memory. And they kind of talk to each other when emotional events happen. So that then leads to more vivid memories. But interestingly, and this is not our research, but other people's research, not necessarily more accurate. So you have this memory, which is like a videotape. It's like you're pressing play and you remember yourself that day. I mean, I certainly do. I remember where I was, who I was talking to. I can remember it, minute by minute or hour by hour, and I can see the images and the smells and so on. But the studies show that it's not necessarily an accurate representation of what happened. So you believe it's accurate because the emotion comes in and that kind of creates a vivid memory. But turns out it's not necessarily more accurate than more mundane events, or at least not as accurate as we believe it is. I think and there's different kind of ideas about why that is, but one idea is that we kind of recall these events quite often. And every time we recall them, we change them. So every time you kind of recollect yourself on 9/11, for example, you're really changing the memory in some way. You're changing it in relation to who you are today and what you're experiencing today. And then
each time you recall it.
Yeah. And then it's kind of what we call consolidate. It reconsolidates. And then when you retrieve it again, you're retrieving the new memory and so forth. That was what we were looking at the time. And the reason that then led to things that I did later was that when I then finished my PhD and I went to do a short postdoc at Harvard, there people were thinking about how you imagine future events. And one of the reasons that your memories are not super accurate is because the memory system is not there to recollect. The memory system is there to help guide your actions, to help you plan for the future. That's why the memory system is there. And to some extent, in order to recall, to imagine future events, what you need to do is you need to take pieces of memories from the past and put them together to create something new. And you use the same system for memory to do that. So really, you need a system that not necessarily can represent an event like a videotape. What you need is something that can combine and make new things in order to imagine yourself in the future, right? So let's take an easy example.
It's the utility of memory.
Well, for example, like if I imagine, my next summer vacation, what I'm doing is I'm recalling past summer vacations.
Right.
And I'm like what people told me and things like that. And I'm building a new image in my mind. Right. Which is my next summer vacation. So you need a system that can do that can take pieces and bits of information, put them together nicely, and create this kind of image. But in fact, what the memory system does, we call it the memory system, but really the system is there to help you imagine future events, to plan ahead, right? And it does that by taking pieces and bits from the past. And that's one of the reasons where the memories are not actually super accurate, because they're not supposed to be. That's not really.
Would they become less accurate the higher the emotional valence around it?
Not necessarily. No.
Okay.
So it's not that they're less accurate. They just seem more accurate. I think what's the difference is.
It seems you have more conviction in it.
Yeah, the difference is this gap between how I believe things are accurate versus how the accuracy to the level that they actually, that's what enhances. Because when things are mundane, you don't really think, oh, my memories are very accurate.
I have no conviction. Right.
But when they're emotional, so it's more the gap that is different. But anyway, so I was then interested, I've done my studies about how you recall these negative traumatic events. I was interested, how do you imagine traumatic emotional events? Does that also involve this interaction between the amygdala and hippocampus? And so I did a study where I asked people to imagine events in the future, and I gave them specific events that are not so great, like the end of a romantic relationship or so. But what I found was that people actually, when they imagined these things, which I was supposed to be negative, they actually turned them around and made them quite positive. So they said, if I said, imagine the end of the relationship, someone would say, I imagine breaking up with my girlfriend and finding someone better. Or I would say, imagine getting stuck out of your apartment. And they said, well, imagine getting stuck. And then I call the landlady. She comes, she opens the door. And sometimes they even had these like fantastic images. For example, I would say, imagine getting a haircut, which is supposed to be like neutral mundane because we wanted to compare it to boring events. But when I told someone, imagine getting a haircut in the future, they said, I imagine getting a haircut and all my friends were with me. I was donating it to Locks of Love. And then we went to a restaurant to celebrate. So imagining the future was something where, everything was kind of pink or more than what it is now. So anyway, that was not good for my study because I want to study what happens in the brain when you imagine negative, terrible events. So it wasn't great that people weren't doing that. And I, for a few months, tried to change the cues, like prompts, like your prompt AI, change the prompts to make them do that. And they wouldn't. And then after a while, I thought, well, that's quite interesting. What is it that causes us to change things to be more positive when we imagine the future? That took me to this kind of idea of optimism and optimism bias, which was in the literature in behavioral economics and to some extent social psychology, but I wasn't as aware of it. I was studying neuroscience and cognitive neuroscience. Once I discovered that really led me to more to the kind of things that I'm doing today, which is now many years later, which is about decision making and trying to make predictions about the future.
And let's get into some of that. I want to talk about your book, Look Again, and Habituation, one of the main reasons I wanted you on. And I wanted to have you on because I've kind of, Tali, gone down this rabbit hole of meditation and mindfulness and this whole thing. And it's been fascinating to explore this aspect of my mind and how it's impacted my life experiences. And meditation has kind of opened up the world of noticing things that are right in front of me, Tali, that maybe I'd never noticed before. I could be sitting in front of a beautiful tree and not see that tree. And it's been there. I just kind of ignored it. And then paying attention to my life has improved the happiness of my life. And so this is very much in that vein. In the book, you're exploring two ideas. Why do we get used to the good things in our life and if we're not careful, ignore those? Or the same thing with the bad things. Instead of changing them, again, get used to it. This is all intuitive, but you explained why we're like this. And I think you say this is pretty much wired in us. Is novelty a survival mechanism?
So the principle of habituation is basically this idea that we respond less and less and less when things are constant or they are very frequent. When I say respond less and less, it means literally, our visual cortex responds to it less. If it's sound, our auditory cortex responds to it less. We're less likely to detect because it's been there for so long. Our neurons simply fire less to things that are just always there. And it's not just humans. It's every species on Earth, down to the very, very bottom of the evolutionary ladder. So when you see something that you could, you can see in all humans and basically every brain system in different creatures, that means there's probably a reason for it, an adaptive reason. And the adaptive reason is related a bit to what you're saying about the importance of novelty, which is the reason we're responding less to things that are not changing are the same is because we need the resources, right? Our neurons need the resources, the energy to be ready to respond to something new that's coming our way because that new thing may kill us. Or it could be good. It could be that new thing coming in and it's something that we want to grab and eat, right? So we need the resources. We can't use the resources to continue responding to things that are already there that haven't killed us. So it is kind of an energy consumption rule that works well. However, the downside of this, and it's true. So far we've talked about, seeing and hearing. There might be an AC in the background and you don't even notice it anymore because it's been there all day. But it's not just perceptual, it's also emotional. So things that may have elicited a strong emotional reaction in us, whether it's good or bad, do so less over time. So maybe there's your neighbor bought a new dog and it's barking. So every time you go next to your neighbor's new dog, you may feel fear, but after a few weeks or a few months, you don't feel the fear anymore. And again, with the good stuff, you move into a new house, it's beautiful and you're amazed by it. But after a while, you will have less of a reaction.
Is this physiological and I hate to parse because I know the body and brain are an ecosystem, but like when I jump in a pool, it's cold, but give it time, I habituate or my system habituates. Is it a system-wide phenomenon?
Yeah. So it's everything, right?
Okay.
It's everything. So it would be literally your neurons responding less, just firing less in response to whatever stimuli is there if it happened.
Doesn't matter. Okay, got it.
And then, that means that you're less likely to see it, that you're likely to feel it. So you call that more psychological. The specific biological mechanism which leads to habituation, which is visual, auditory, or emotional, are different. So you might have a little bit of a different, it's not exactly the same mechanism for all these different examples that we're giving, but the underlying rule is the same, which is our brain and our body responds less to things that are repeated.
So something, if I do a cold plunge, something biologically may change. I'm getting used to it for multiple reasons.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Your brain will respond to it less, but yes, for cold, there has been a lot of studies on kind of adaptation to cold weather or hot weather or hot water. You have all these fun studies that we actually mentioned in the book where they put people in like a bath with cold water every day for like 10 hours, like crazy things like that. And then look at their physiological response. So it is physiological.
You mentioned, or you were about to touch on, and I think I interrupted you about, I think you were headed in this direction. Is this partly about modeling or predictive matching?
Yes. So one of the things that we're doing, the brain does at all times, is trying to predict what will come next, right? My next word. So you're predicting the word before I say it. You're predicting everything visually and so on. So if I'm used to, the trees outside of my window, if I move my eyes, I'm already expecting to see a certain thing. And so the brain has what it's called like a surprise response, or sometimes it's called a prediction error, when things are different from what we expect. So when things are different, that's when we get quite a strong response, right? Because it says, this is something that we need to encode, we need to pay attention to. But when things are the same, then there isn't that kind of surprise signal that you would otherwise see. So as you mentioned, I said, okay, this is overall a good thing because it helps us. It's a good thing because it's important for our survival. We need the resources. It also can be psychologically helpful. So for example, the fact that we habituate and adapt to negative events in our life that we can't change is a good thing, right? So after we lost a loved one, or even smaller things, you failed on some project, you might feel really, really bad, but the fact that we get over it after a while, we adapt to it. We adapt to the loss of something, whether it's a loved one or something like that. That's a good thing because that means we can move forward, right? So that's another good thing. However, there's also the negative aspects to it, which is, and it's how you introduced this in the beginning, which is we might not feel as much joy from the good things in our life. And we all have some good things. Most of us have some good things in our life, whether it's a loving relationship or a comfortable home, interesting job. But over time, we may notice these things less and therefore not react or not have as much joy in response to them, right? So that's kind of the negative. The other negative part is, and you mentioned that as well, is that we also get used to bad things in our life where if we didn't get used to them, we may be able to change them and make them better, whether it's in our life or in society. So it could be the big things in society, racism, sexism, and so on, or it could be just inefficiencies in the workplace, maybe cracks in your relationship. If they're there for a long time and therefore you're less likely to notice, you're also less likely to change.
Well, let's talk about kind of a two-edged sword here, right? On the good side, because you mentioned resilience, I'm going to talk about, but I remember I had the commute. It was an hour long. I'm sorry, it was 2 hours. It was an hour one way. And I had this, when I started the commute, Tali, at this job, I was like, you know what, I'm going to move. I'm going to do this temporarily, see how the job works out. I habituated, somehow I don't know how I did, because it was terrible, but I did for like 6 years, right? and I never wound up moving. But so the good is that I guess that I wasn't miserable. At some point, I hit that habituation, or I was habituated, and I didn't have the cost of moving. Now, I'm not saying it's a net good. I'm just saying I could see how I get used to it. The bad is obviously we're gonna gloss over what's good in our lives or beautiful or what have you. So I could kind of see. I don't know if you would call that resilience, me getting used to that commute, but let's talk about resilience specifically, because you mentioned in the book it can be a part of what makes us resilient. And I didn't understand that outside of given enough time, you get over something, you adapt. Is that the emotional amplification, let's say sadness or depression or anger or whatever it is, that will just dissipate over time? Is that how we're talking about resilience here? Because Tali, I was trying to figure out how to use it in a sense, because on the face of it, it seems palliative, not supportive, right? What do I do with that? I mean, okay, does it just mean I need to realize I'm going to at some point get over it? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Hope I'm
So
making
in
sense.
terms of that resilience, yes, it does mean you bounce back relatively fast. So, people
Faster than
because
you think you would? Or,
yes,
okay.
absolutely. There's a lot of research showing what's known as an impact bias, which is you believe things are going to impact you more than they end up impacting you. That's true for both negative and positive. But let's say about the negative, like for example, there's been studies. This is by Daniel Gilbert. So, for example, he would ask people how they would feel if they get divorced. How would they feel if they don't get tenure for academics? And they think it's going to be, the end of the world and so on. But then when these things happen, actually they get over them much faster than they anticipated. So they don't have as much negative impact as you imagine they would. So this kind of bouncing back, I mean, that is resilience, right? Bouncing back. That means we can move forward. Okay. So I failed in this exam and now I'm bouncing back and I'm going to continue. But I think that the major point of our book in terms of what you can do to change your life, perhaps, or to, little tweaks, is not so much about taking in the habituation to become more resilient. It's actually the idea of being able to see things again. So the opposite of kind of what you're saying, because we're already adapting and habituating. So most of us, right? People do have a good habituation adaptation. So resilience, actually, humans are hugely resilient, much more than you think. What we are saying is, well, but then the negative parts of it, of not seeing the things that we can change, of not feeling the joy, that's where we want to help people make changes. And so few of the things that we talk about is how just making small changes to your routine can actually cause you to be able to see and feel things again that you didn't because you just habituated. So introducing diversity into your life, variety, trying new things, and so on, how that can then trigger things like well-being and creativity.
So you're saying, correct me if I'm wrong, so I just want to make sure for our audience. So there's this good news. We are naturally resilient because of this feature where we habituate. And I'm going to use the term adapt here when it comes to resilience, right? We may not feel that way at the moment, given the situation. Let's say it just happened, whatever. Breakup, I lost a job, whatever. But I was thinking this way. Tell me if this is self-help trash or something, but this too shall pass. Everybody's heard that, right? And I was wondering if there's some kind of helpful mantra like that, like I too shall recover. I may not know it, but I can look at my history and see that I recover. I just, life pushes me forward, right? So that's the first thing. The second thing is you're saying, but there's these, and I want to get to them, like this habituation. There are other things we could do to lighten up what's good in our life that will counter this bad mood that the setback has. Boy, I just threw a lot at you.
Yeah. And, we do have a whole chapter about mental health problems and psychiatric problems. And we do make the point, which is the data shows that people with mental health problems of all sorts to usually have a problem with some aspect of habituation. So when we say most people are resilient and most people adapt and habituate, that is on average. But then you do have people who are, have certain problems, and are less likely to bounce back. And so to take depression, for example, people with depression are less likely to bounce back from negative events. So we cite a paper, for example, by Aaron Heller, who's a professor at the University of Miami, where he asked students who just got a result of an important exam how they were feeling. And then he went back to them every 45 minutes for the rest of the day to see how they were feeling. And so everyone felt better over time, but there was a huge difference between people with depression or a history of depression. Their ability to bounce back, to feel that was way slower. While the people without depression, without a history of depression, they felt really, really bad at the beginning, as bad as people with depression, but they were able to bounce back quite faster from that experience. So that's just depression. But in fact, we talk about a lot of different conditions, and schizophrenia, for example, is also characterized by some problems, habituation, more perceptual habituation.
Is this where rumination comes in?
So one of the reasons people with depression have a problem with bouncing back or habituating is because of the rumination. So they keep going back to the event, right? Thinking about it. And then it's hard to habituate because you're constantly ruminating about what are the potential negative consequences of this and so on. And that means that the emotion, it does go down over time, even with people with depression, but it's slower because you're internally generating this negative feeling again and again and again.
You're bringing it up over and over.
Yeah.
You're kind of picking at the wound, sort of,
Exactly.
right? Rumination, and it keeps you down versus, boy, the word habituation throws me because the name has a negative connotation to me, habituation. But it all depends on the context is when it's
Absolutely.
negative, right? So you don't adapt. So I'm just going to, just for my staying on track here with you, forgive me. You're not going to adapt to the setback if you keep picking at what happened over and over again, ruminating.
It's harder. It's slower and harder.
Got it.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's back up about the problem of habituation, because what I loved about the book, first, it was a great book, but you mentioned one of my favorite TV shows of all time, Twilight Zone. And specifically.
And that's, by the way, that's. So the book is co-authored with Cass Sunstein, and he's a Twilight Zone fan.
That makes sense.
But I remember that piece that he wrote. Yes.
There was this, just for the audience, the book mentions an episode in the first season, a nice place to visit. So it's a great episode where this guy, bank robber, whatever, he dies, and he's in this wonderful place where he gets all of his wishes fulfilled. He's gambling. He can't lose. There's actually a scene, because when I read your book, I rewatched it, where he shoots pool and all the balls go into the various holes. He gets all the balls in the holes, but he becomes very bored with it because he wins all the time. And so at the end, the punchline is he's like, man, I want to go to the other place because he thinks he's in heaven. And I think it's this great actor says that his guide there is saying, oh, wait, you made a mistake. This is the other place. And then he laughs maliciously. That's the great Twilight Zone ending. So he's actually in hell, and hell is getting everything you want all the time and everything's perfect. But it's prescient in the sense that neuroscience has caught up to this fact that habituation can be a very bad thing. This is where boring stuff comes from, just repetitive. You get used to it. And it made me think, Tali, I could be off base, but I was thinking about very rich people, movie stars, people who sometimes you see them commit suicide or whatever. They trash their life. And you're like, how in the world could this person be unhappy? And habituation could explain a lot of it if it's just this constant thing and they haven't dishabituated. Sorry, went down a rabbit hole. I just wanted to amplify the bad of habituation.
And this relates to this idea that one thing that's really important for people is a sense of progression. You always want to feel that you're progressing, right? That you're moving forward, that you're learning something. This kind of goes back a little bit to what we talked about at the beginning, the joy of thinking. Learning is a really important thing. And so, both of them, and I think they're related. So one is like you want to see yourself progressing. And the problem in this place that he is heaven, where everything is just given to him and he can get whatever he wants, there's nowhere to progress from there. And there's not much learning going on. And learning is something that
he never loses. So there's no lesson.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I mean, there's no effort, there's no gain, right? You're
Or
not.
variety. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I guess that's
Effort.
true.
That's good. That's
Yeah.
good. Yeah.
So studies show that people really enjoy learning. So there's a really fun study by two neuroscientists, Rob Rutledge and Bastian Blaine. And what they did is they had people play a task, play a little game. If they did well in the game, they could get money. And every few minutes, they asked them how they were feeling. And what they found is when people did well and they got money, they were happy. But they were happy the most, they were happiest when they learned something new about the task. So learning induced happiness and joy more than material goods. And if you think about it, that makes sense because to material goods, whether it's money or whatever money can buy, we habituate to it, right? But we can't habituate to learning because learning by definition is change and you can't habituate to change. So if you take progression, if you take learning away from people, even if they're at the top of their game, then I think depression is going to kick in, negative mood is going to kick in. And that also relates to this other thing that we talk about, which is there is this well-known happiness curve, which is happiness really dips in your midlife. So it starts quite high, kids and teenagers, it goes down, 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 hits rock bottom in your midlife, and then it starts going up again. Interesting after that. But if you think about what's going on during the midlife period, that's a time where there's least amount of change, least amount of progression. You may be at the top of your game, whether it is personally or professionally, but you are not necessarily progressing and learning to the extent that you did when you were younger. And we think that's one of the reasons for this kind of midlife dip. There's many reasons. It's not the only one, but it's one of the reasons we believe for the midlife dip. And it's really the time where things have been same for a very long time. On average, people kind of have lived in the same place, have been in the same relationship, been kind of in the same job, more or less. And these things can be great. The relationship can be good, where you're living can be good, but it's not changing, not progressing. Learning is minimized. And then funny enough, later in life, you are put in a situation where you need to change and you need to learn. Like the kids are leaving the house, maybe you're retiring, the world is changing.
You got to figure out what to do next.
What to do, yeah. And you have to kind of change your environment. And that could be a reason where actually, surprisingly, later in life, happiness goes up again.
I was going to say, because it
stays up until the last couple of years of life.
That is it.
But you
take up a new hobby. You never golfed. You're golfing.
Right.
Whatever.
Exactly. Yeah. Maybe you're traveling. Maybe you're moving. I don't know. Oh, at least you need to figure it out.
Traveling.
Yeah, traveling is all about learning. It's all about change.
It seems to me, but you tell me that it may be unintuitive for people, especially young people, that part of happiness is effort. There's some level, because effort is tied in with learning, right? I don't mean hard for hard's sake, but learning. But that takes effort. You've got to push yourself, what have you. Those things can bring learning, novelty, which then results in well-being or accrued happiness.
Yeah. So effort, that's a really interesting kind of concept. When is effort painful? We don't really have answers to that.
No,
but
I think
the intuition is correct, which is that I think perhaps something about the effort makes you feel like you've learned and progressed. Because maybe if things are kind of like too easy or you don't need to focus it, maybe you haven't learned
flow state.
Anything.
You're out of flow. There's a heuristic where you need X amount of challenge, so you're not bored. But if you go too far, there's a balance there.
Right. So that's another interesting curve, the learning curve, which is I said people enjoy learning, but the sweet spot is when you're learning something. So it's not like there's no information at all, where it's, as you said, like there's nothing for me to learn either because it's random or, right? So that's like, people don't like that. And then on the other hand, when things are too difficult, you're not learning as well because it's too difficult. And then people don't enjoy that as well. So it's really like this middle part where you're able to learn because there's enough challenge or information for you to gather. But on the other hand, it's not too difficult.
Part of my career, when I looked for a job, I had one of the criteria was learning. What could I learn at this new job? And if the income and the other things were there, but that wasn't, I tend to dismiss it, what have you, or try to. But so that's fascinating. Okay. So we see the downside of habituation and also the benefit of, and I'll use the word, adapting to things. And by the way, if there's something in habituation that I didn't touch on that we need to, please let me know. But let's talk about how we improve our lives and increase our happiness. Is this now the part we're talking about dishabituating? By the way, am I saying that right? Dishabituation. Okay. I've never used that term in my life. So habituation.
We try to think about other words, but yeah, the words, I mean, it was a difficult, like the word habituation is not something that people are kind of used to, but then it's not really habit. And
it doesn't roll off the tongue. Yeah. So tell us that.
There's two main ways, and they are related to each other. So one is creating more variety in your life. So there's studies showing that people who have more diverse lives, maybe they've lived in different places, interact with different types of people, work on different projects, they have a more psychologically rich life. And as a result, it really enhances well-being. And that is something that we can induce in our own life. So we can make small changes. So it could be something as small as commuting to work in a different way, or taking a different route. It could be taking on a different sport, or taking a course, like an online course. It's different from from your field. And even really small things such as, for example, there's a study showing that if you change your immediate environment, so for example, I'm working here in like my office, I go out for a walk, I come back, every time I go sit in the kitchen, every time that I make a change, the study shows that your creativity is actually enhanced. Now, the enhancement only lasts for about 6 minutes, but 6 minutes could be your eureka moment.
Yeah, that's great, because I work for myself. I'm always trying to find a place to work from, be more creative, and I'll pick places outdoors if it's nice out, and I'll purposely plan a walk to it.
Because your brain is then kind of open, because it's suddenly getting, new information. You're getting new visual information, auditory information, and so on. And it could be a little bit distracting in some ways, but also it means that these different pieces of information that may be unrelated to each other are more likely to collide and create a new idea.
As I was reading your book, the 19th century poem about absence makes the heart grow fonder has been proven true.
Yes, within relationships, right?
Yes.
So then, we talked about creativity. And just to quickly say one more thing that we talked.
Yeah, because I interrupted you. I'm sorry.
Yeah. I just wanted to say, because we talked a little bit before about that some conditions, mental health conditions, are related to slow habituation, right? However, it's also been shown that people who are slow to habituate actually tend to be more creative. So
say that again. People who are slow
to habituate, they don't habituate that fast, right? So, the normal person, it's like, there's a noise, and after a while I can't hear it, or like I don't notice my background because it's been there for so long, or whatever, smells and so on. So people who are slower to habituate, meaning they are more likely to continue to encode the information, turns out that they're more creative. So you could there's many ways to measure habituation. And that specific study by a professor at Harvard, she looked at how fast people habituate to a sound. So if you hear a sound, there's usually a response, like a skin conductance response, for example. So she had the same sound again and again and again, and she just measured their response from their skin. According to that, she could see whether you habituate fast, meaning, at the beginning, there's a big response, very fast, the response goes down, or whether it stays quite high. And so she found that these people who it stays quite high, they don't habituate, they tended to be more creative in the sense that they had books published, they had art in galleries, they had a patent under their name.
The leaf blower. I'm not used to that yet. That's been going on for years. It's outside I'm more creative.
It's not a one-to-one. It's just a correlation.
Come on, Tali. All right.
And so, going back to relationships. Yes. So, that's one of the known problem in relationships, right? People, you can be in a relationship at the beginning. It's a whirlwind romance, but over time, you have less of a reaction to your loved one, your spouse, less kind of the feelings, perhaps. And it was interesting because we listened to Esther Perel, the well-known
she talks about
experts on relationships. And actually, Cass, my co-author, happened to be in a wedding, and she was sitting next to him at the wedding, and so they had a discussion.
Oh wow, wow!
And of course, they were talking about
Oh, what a great guest list.
relationships because they were in a wedding. But so what she says, and so she did many surveys as this, when she asked people, hey, when are you most attracted to your partner? She finds two answers to be the most frequent. One is when I haven't seen them for a while and then I come back. Okay. And the second is when I see them in a new situation. So it could be a new environment. They could be on stage doing something, or they're talking to some strangers, the novelty. So I think these two things are exactly dishabituation, right? One is like new things. So you suddenly attend because it's different, it's new. And the other is when you're away and then you come back, you dishabituate. That is a well-known phenomena. So if you have, your favorite dish, there's a study on mac and cheese. And they had mac and cheese. They liked mac and cheese and mac and cheese every day, 3 times a day. And obviously quite quickly, they didn't like mac and cheese that much, right? They didn't get joy from mac and cheese. But then if for other people, they had mac and cheese and they didn't have mac and cheese for a week, and then they had mac and cheese again, they enjoy the mac and cheese more. It makes sense.
All
so
right.
It's kind of similar. Take mac and cheese, replace that with your loved one. If you're there every day, you don't notice. But if you're away and then you're coming back, then you're more likely to notice. And not only your spouse in a relationship, but also just your environment. There's like, you come back, there's a wonderful quote that we got from Jodie Foster. And she said she was away on location for filming for 6 months. And then she got back and she found that things that were just ordinary and she didn't notice before suddenly seemed amazing. So suddenly an avocado seemed amazing, or she was so delighted to go to the gym again. Right? Things that 6 months ago didn't really have much of a reaction, suddenly they felt really kind of important and joyful. And so I think we if people go on a business trip, maybe just for a weekend or maybe more, you often have this experience, and I feel it as well, that when you come back, suddenly things feel a little bit new again.
Yeah.
Right? You're suddenly able to see and appreciate.
I want to ask you about back up with the relationship. What about role playing or dress up, two lovers? I'm asking for a friend. I'm being a little facetious, but
that sounds to me.
Okay.
I mean, I've never thought about this specific example, but I think you're right. It goes
I'll
into
tell
like
them.
the novel situation that she was talking about, right?
Okay.
Unless you're doing the same role playing again and again and again, then you habituate to it. But yes, I think you're right.
So I've told this story multiple times to various friends, what have you, but I just never forgotten this. I was on a plane a long time ago with a famous minister, author. We were sitting next to each other and we just struck up a conversation. I don't know how we got here, but he said that his son had an office in the background. It was in these beautiful mountains, wherever he was located, Denver or I don't remember, but he said the window behind him, his son's office, you could see this beautiful mountain range. And he was struck, the father was struck by it. And he said to his son, do you know how you could not get used to that? Because that is beautiful. Do you know how you do it? And the son said, how? And he said, you need to turn around when you see it, say, that is beautiful. Out loud, you need to say, that is beautiful. And I never forgot that. So now I try, when I see a beautiful sunset, whatever, I try to verbally say it.
That's interesting. He's using habit to dishabituate. So he's using habit. The habit is every time I see this, A, I should do B, which is say, this is beautiful, right? So he's creating a habit. But the habit is designed to make you notice things.
Okay. All right. Is there anything like that we haven't broached or mentioned that can help us not habituate to the beautiful things, the wonderful things we have? You mentioned, time away from it. Maybe when we return, we look at things differently. You mentioned, I thought it was interesting because you talked about COVID. When COVID hit and we were locked into our house, my wife and I, we started living in areas of the home and the property the pool's kind of like a statue. We just look at the pool. We never win it, but we've got these wonderful floaties and we lived in the pool for a while, right? And it was nice. It was like, oh, wow. And then we redesigned the whole backyard. That became an area. So there was I noticed, our happiness level went up when we dishabituated by changing or going to different areas of the same place. anything else like that?
Yeah. So I describe in the book something a little bit similar, which is when I got COVID and the rest of the family didn't, when COVID was back in the day,
bastards.
I went and I lived downstairs in the basement. First of all,
Did they banish you? I'm just curious. Did they banish you or did you self?
I thought it was the right thing to do. It makes
All right.
sense. One
They
of
did
the three of
banish you.
them.
All right.
But first of all, it was kind of fun living in the basement for a couple of days or how long I was there, at least in the beginning.
You smoked.
And
You can film me.
no,
This is all right.
I could do whatever. But then also, because that's kind of unusual. I don't spend time in the basement. But then when I came back to life, then I had that same reaction. I was like, oh, what a wonderful view, that kind of thing. But one other thing that we mentioned is something that we got from Laurie Santos. And she talks about how she doesn't use the word dishabituation, but I think it's a similar idea where she says, well, close your eyes and imagine not having everything that you have, like not having your spouse, not having your home, right? Like really try to imagine that with vividness and detail. And then, you open your eyes and you're able kind of to see and feel again.
That's a Stoic visualization called negative visualization.
So that's,
yeah.
Yeah. So that's like an extreme example of maybe going away for a while. It's kind of the idea of like, well, I really don't have it. Or perhaps the opposite of what you were suggesting, where you see the view and you say, oh, that's beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of to say, well, I don't have it. And now you open your eyes and now you have it again.
Yeah,
so that's using imagination to dishabituate.
Yeah. I've had some friends pass away and sometimes in my meditation, I'll take myself out of or I'll use my imagination to take myself out of the picture. Like, what if I was not here? Right.
Mm.
Just what, and I'll be looking at the pool or the back, or just like, what if there's something that would elicit some form of gratitude for me still being here when I do that imagination, which brings me to gratitude, because this can lead to gratitude. But I wanted to ask your opinion on it, because being grateful for things every day, because I didn't even think about this, but it was very fascinating, Kelly. When I was reading your book, I was thinking, oh, this is why gratitude can be hard, because I'm habituated. So if I say, I'm grateful for my house, I'm grateful for my life, sometimes the feeling is not there, even though intellectually I am grateful. Does that make sense? And I was like, why am I not feeling? Because they say gratitude makes you happier, right? But sometimes even being grateful, you don't feel gratitude, if that makes sense. So I don't know if you have any outside of the imagination technique. I don't know.
So we actually talk about this dissociation between your emotions and cognition, thinking. Our studies showing that you habituate emotionally, you can habituate quite fast. But what doesn't necessarily habituate is this understanding of what things are. So, in their study, what they do is they show kind of nice photos. I think it's cute photos of babies and puppies and things like that. And they measure people's responses. So you can measure like facial expressions to see if you get a positive reaction. And they can see the habituation. So the first time you see this photo, there's a smile, and then less and less over time. So habituation emotionally is there and it's quite rapid. But what doesn't change is the evaluation. People would still say, oh, this is a wonderful photo. This is a nice photo, right? So cognitively, in that case, it was less of a habituation cognitively and much faster emotionally. So that I think that fits what you're saying, which is you can say you're grateful and you are grateful, but perhaps the feeling is what's missing.
Yeah. What is that saying then? That am I grateful even if I don't feel it, or am I not grateful until I feel it?
Yeah, I don't know. It's a good question.
Okay. All right. Okay.
I think
my intuition tells me I'm not really unless I feel it. But boy, that's a great question, right? Certainly if it's in my head.
Yeah. And it's interesting when things are dissociated. Like, you have
Yeah.
and there's a lot, this dissociation, you see it in a lot of, so when we want to measure people's, and then the word matters here, whether I say happiness or satisfaction and so on. So there's different ways to measure people's well-being or how much they enjoy their life. So one is to actually ask about how they're feeling on a momentary basis, right? How are you feeling now? How are you feeling now? Another is just an evaluation of your life. Are you satisfied with your life? What do you think, about? And so there's often this dissociation where people can say, I have a good life. I'm satisfied with my life because I have this and this and this or whatever. But then the feelings may not be there. The daily feeling of joy and happiness may not necessarily be there. So that's also a well-known phenomena. And I think the habituation is more for the experience, the experiential feelings.
What is a dishabituation entrepreneur?
Yes. So this goes back to being able to see how things can be better. That there's some things around us that may not be optimal, but because of habituation, we just got used to them. And the dishabituation entrepreneur is the name that we gave to these people who, for some reason, and we kind of speculate what the reason may be, but for some reason, they are able to see these things. The things that everyone around them just are not seeing anymore because they habituate. They're able to see it and then to make other people see it as well, and perhaps eventually to change. So we have kind of a few examples. We also have, one example is a professor at Princeton. The way she caused other people, she was concerned about the ratio of females to males speakers in conferences. And the way she made other people dishabituate, because the problem was that people are kind of used to having more males and females when they go to a conference and they're speakers. So they kind of don't notice that anymore. But she wanted to make it salient. So she put together this website where there's a list of conferences in her field, which is neuroscience. And next to each conference, she has the names of the organizers. And then she has the ratio of female to male in the field as a whole. And then she has the ratio of speakers in that field. And so now you can see it clearly in front of you. You can see, the ratio as a whole is 4-6, but the speakers ratio is only like 1-6, for example. Right. So it's clear and it's salient. And so we're more likely to notice it.
I think you also mentioned that somebody from one department can temporarily work in a different department and with fresh eyes see the same things that maybe other people have glossed over because they're new. They're coming in new. So I thought that was very interesting. Is there a certain number of repeated? So I'm thinking about food, meals, and habituating to a great meal. I don't want to, right? Because this maybe ties into, I'd like your opinion on what savoring means to you and how that can lead, or does that lead to dishabituation, savoring? But I'm also wondering, is there a certain amount of time something is repeated that it becomes habituated, that you become habituated to? Has that been quantified at all? Or is that because we're all different, it's different for everybody?
So there would be a lot of variability, I would say, according to individual differences and what is the exact stimulus that we're talking about.
Okay.
So there's most of the studies are something specific, so they specifically look at habituation to like a cold bath. And then, so if there are studies that looking at specific things, and then you can see on average, you can see the
like meals.
graph.
I have a favorite meal.
Yeah.
I have it.
So there, yeah. And then what does habituation actually mean? Does it mean because it does go down all the time, right? I mean, it goes down, I would say from this very, very early on. So
immediately, you mean the enjoyment of
the enjoyment goes down very early on.
Okay. Well, that's interesting. All right.
But I mean, we have this fun study at the beginning of the book. I think we mentioned this about habituation to like vacations, holidays, where I worked with a tourism company and we went on location, like in resorts, to ask people how they were feeling. And we did that every day. And they had surveys to do that. And what we found is that people were happiest 43 hours into a vacation. So 43 hours. 43 hours in. But 43 gave them time to kind of like, unpack and get used to their environment enough to start having fun. And then from that point on, that's where fun was like highest. Happiness was highest. And then it started going down and down and down and down and down. They were still happy on, the last 7 or day 8, but not as happy as 43 hours in.
That's interesting.
So,
so should I break up a trip? Should I do 3 days in Italy, then 3 days in
Right.
Amsterdam?
So this was a resort. So they were in the same, these were resorts. So it wasn't the kind of trip where you're moving around.
Okay. Okay.
They were in one place. So it makes sense and they habituate a bit faster. But I think from that, so that's just an example of, I
Sure.
could take something specific like a resort and I can tell you
Right.
the average. So yes, there's a study about this kind of sound or this kind of meal, but it's a little bit hard to otherwise to say. But I think, from that study, it suggests that really you want shorter vacation or at least have it change every few days.
So, and just to put a kind of pin in it, you do validate the whole idea of you should spend your money on experiences rather than possessions, because the experiences are by nature active and novel and what have you. But you also have this interesting point where an experience, the happiness increases over time due to memory of that experience. I think. I hope I didn't get that wrong. Versus a possession is with you and you're habituating because you've got it with you all the time.
Yeah. So the idea is because an experience is fleeting, funny enough, that's why the joy that we get from it can actually be longer because it's not there for very long. So we don't habituate, but yet once in a while we recall it. And so it's in front of us, like something that's always there, a TV or something. It's always there. So we habituate, but it comes back once in a while. So we don't habituate to it as much. And that actually also goes back to the thing that we talked in the beginning, which is we actually change our memories, right? We change every time we recollect it. We actually make a small change. So they're constantly changing to some degree too.
Tali, this has been great. Where can people find you if they want to contact you or your research? Do I direct them to the Affective Lab site or?
Affectivebrain.com is our website. And then on there, you can find articles for, just popular press kind of articles. You can also find the academic, more nerdy articles. There's links to talks, again, different types.
Great. And I want to push everybody to the book. Look again. It's great. I've got a lot of highlights and what have you. So Tali, thank you so much. This has been fun. Thank you for sharing.
My pleasure.
Well, that's a wrap. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed it, do share it with your friends and on your social platforms. Big thanks to Sam Williams, my audio guy, and the beautiful bumper music you're hearing is Michael Petrovich's Bella Luna. For all my show notes or resource links, visit LarryWeeks.com, and we will talk again soon.